Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. Thank you for your leadership on this matter. Thanks particularly for your leadership on the DREAM Act, which I've been proud to co-sponsor with you every time you've put it in. I want to focus on the other controversial part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the amendment in the Act now as it came out of the Armed Services Committee, on which I'm privileged to serve, that would repeal the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Before I speak to it, I want to thank a lot of people who are here who worked so hard to build up support for this repeal, to take something unjust out of our military system and make it just. And I thank Joe Salmonese, who's here from the Human Rights Campaign, Eric Alva and Mike Almy, who are just typical of two patriotic Americans who want to serve and have been denied that opportunity simply because of their sexual orientation. I also want to give a little bit of a shout out to Aubrey Sarvis of the Service Members Legal Defense Fund and Alex Nicholson from the Service Members United for their leadership on this issue, and to thank the Palm Center and the Third Way, who've also contributed a great deal to the effort to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Talk about a shout-out, if I may just diverge from the serious for a moment. I'm in synagogue last Saturday. It's the holiest day of the year, the Day of Atonement. A guy that I know there who's a doctor comes over to me and says, "Excuse me for interrupting your prayer, but I just have to tell you that Tuesday night, my daughter attended a concert that Lady Gaga gave in Hartford. And she came home late that night, and all she wanted to talk about was how thrilled she was that Lady Gaga gave a shout-out to somebody she knew from her synagogue." So, you know, the Lord acts in very mysterious and wonderful ways. I opposed Don't Ask, Don't Tell when it was adopted in 1993, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the legislation and the amendment to repeal it. It's long past time to repeal this policy, which is both unjust, un-American, and extremely hurtful to the effectiveness of our military. I want to say that, and just put an exclamation point after what Dick Durbin said, the National Defense Authorization Act, on which the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell of which is part, is a critically important piece of legislation. And the fact that our colleagues would be having on the Senate floor this debate about whether to vote to proceed to take up the National Defense Authorization Act, to me, is unbelievable. I mean, the question of whether to vote to proceed to take up this critically important piece of legislation to our military ought to be a no-brainer. It really is a no-brainer. And it's very frustrating that we're having this debate about this part of it. If you're against the DREAM Act, if you're against repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, okay, vote that way when it comes up on the floor, but don't stop it from coming up. And why? Why is it passed ever since the 50s? Because it's critically important to the military. If the underlying legislation doesn't pass, we will not have legal authorization for a series of increases in compensation and benefits for members of the U.S. military and their families. Do my colleagues really want to stop that from happening? We will not have the authorization in this bill for acquisition of significant new military systems to enable our military not only to remain the most effective fighting force in the world, but to better protect the men and women of the U.S. military. If this bill doesn't pass, a whole series of critically necessary military construction projects at bases here in the U.S. and around the world will not be able to go forward. Do my colleagues really want to stop that from happening? Do they feel that strongly against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell or the DREAM Act that they would stand in the way of those benefits for our military being distributed and authorized? I don't think so, and I hope not. Let me be brief about Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It is unfair, it's unjust, it's not consistent with America's most fundamental value of equal opportunity. It has denied almost 14,000 members of our military who were in the military the right to continue to serve, to put their lives on the line to protect our security. and freedom. And why were they kicked out of the military? Not because they were bad members of the military, not because they violated the military code of conduct in their personal behavior, but because of their private sexual orientation. That's wrong. It's not only wrong, it's just counter to the best interest of the military. There's actually a fiscal impact of that. Incidentally, 14,000 soldiers terminated from military service because of their sexual orientation is the equivalent of an entire division of warfighters. It's the equivalent of an entire division of warfighters who we sorely need to protect our security and our freedom around the world. I've seen some estimates which I think are credible that in terminating the service of those 14,000 people, we have wasted over $600 million that was spent to train them. $600 million is a consequential amount of money even in the military budget, believe me. Second, the argument, I want to deal very briefly with the arguments that have been made on the floor against Don't Ask, Don't Tell. People have been saying it's a social experiment, it shouldn't be on military authorization legislation. There's no other piece of legislation it should be on. It's about the military. It's about whether and under what circumstances Americans can serve in the military. Others have said that it's premature to adopt this repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell now, before the study that is being done by the Pentagon is concluded. But look, President Obama, Secretary Gates, Admiral Mullen have said publicly they've reached a decision on this, that it's time to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It doesn't work for our military. And the study that's being done is basically to inform the implementation of that decision, if we authorize it, as to how best to go about the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The amendment doesn't go into effect until after the study being done at the Pentagon is done, and most significantly, as a final guarantee to the skeptics. If the authorization bill is adopted with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that provision does not go into effect until 60 days after the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff all certify in writing that repeal is consistent with the standards of military readiness, military effectiveness, unit cohesion, and recruiting and retention of the armed forces. So there's a lot of reason in this. Incidentally, we also do not tell the military exactly when to do it or how to do it according to what pace. It's going to be a close vote today. And it ought not to be a close vote, as I said earlier. To me, the vote on whether to proceed to this critically important legislation ought to be a no-brainer. If for some reason we don't succeed in getting the 60 votes to proceed, this ain't over. We're going to come back in the session in November and December. I spoke to Senator Reid today, and he's very clear and strong that he's going to bring this bill to the floor in November or December, hopefully November, because he has to, because the military needs the bill. I don't believe that the opponents of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell have enough votes to take that repeal out of this legislation. Maybe that's why they're fighting so hard to stop this legislation from coming up. But when this bill comes up today, and then again, if it doesn't get to 60 votes today, they're going to have to ask themselves whether they feel so strongly against one or two of the parts of this bill that they are prepared to block all the assistance that this bill gives to our military at a time when so many of our men and women in the military are in combat. I hope and pray that that will not be the case. I know there's a lot of frustration about the fact that we're arguing over this motion to proceed. I feel that frustration. But maybe the best thing I can say now, and I believe it based on what I know about the mood in the Senate and the commitment of the Senate leadership to get this bill up today or in November, is to remember what Dr. King said, which is, and I paraphrase it, the moral arc of the universe sometimes bends slowly, but it always bends toward justice. And it's time to bring some justice in this particular regard to the United States military. Thank you.